All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rice Report, our conversation series here. This is such a cool thing to be able to do, to have conversations with people who've walked the walk, who've been in rooms, who've been down the roads. It's such an important thing to get this perspective from people. And today we are joined by Joe DiGenova, who is a former attorney in the District of Columbia. He has been down many legal battles, much involvement out there. Joe, I'm going to let you run down your background a little bit for everyone, because I'm going to probably miss 3 or 4 things. One of the more storied legal folks in this country. And one of the favorite things that I have about Joe is that he has gone down the road many of us have. He's been kind of shadow banned from Fox and some of these other things for his opinions. And I love reading people's Wikipedia where they're accused of conspiracy theories, which 3 years later become the facts and become the truth. So Joe, give us a little rundown of your history here, because it is extensive.
Well, I went to Georgetown Law School. After attending the University of Cincinnati, where I studied political science. After law school, I clerked for a fantastic federal judge on the D.C. Court of Appeals, George Gallagher. Then I became an assistant United States attorney in the District of Columbia. And then after that, I went to work on Capitol Hill for the Church Committee, which was investigating illegal and unconstitutional activities by the CIA and the FBI and the NSA. After that, I returned to the U.S. Attorney's Office to be the chief deputy, where I had been an assistant, and then Ronald Reagan nominated me to be U.S. attorney in 1983. And I held that job until 1988. I then went in and created my own law firm. And during that time, I was asked by the United States Court of Appeals to be the independent counsel of the United States to investigate the rifling of Bill Clinton's passport file during the George W. Bush administration. Then after that, I went back into private practice after being independent counsel, and I was then asked, along with my wife, Victoria Tunsing, by Newt Gingrich, to be special counsel to the House of Representatives to investigate the Teamsters Union, which was then run by Ron Carey. There was a huge investigation. The Democrats did all they could to obstruct it in the House of Representatives, but they were unsuccessful. We had a great investigation, which ultimately led to the indictment of Ron Carey and to the elevation of James R. Hoffa to be the president of the Teamsters Union. Again, back into private practice, and have been doing a lot of fun things since then, including representing people all over the world and in the United States.
Wow. I mean, I couldn't have done that justice. So you're even dealing in the Jimmy Hoffa case in your career. I mean, this is fascinating, Joe. So let's go through the original investigations from the Church Committee into the intelligence agencies. Mm-hmm. What are the findings from that case that you can disclose, and how difficult is it to build a case against these guys?
Well, in 1975 and 76, the United States Senate set up a select committee on intelligence to investigate the FBI, the CIA, the National Security Agency as a result of revelations which had occurred during Watergate and thereafter about illegal activities by the CIA and the FBI in domestic affairs of the United States. It was a fascinating time. The committee was given full power of subpoena. The chairman was Frank Church, a very, very ultra-liberal guy from Idaho. The ranking member was John Tower of Texas, a really great guy, and Howard Baker. They were sort of joint ranking members. I worked for both of them at the time. We conducted investigations into the assassination plots conducted by the CIA, which were completely sanctioned, by the way, by the presidents at the time. There was a great effort on the part of the Democrats and the media to make it look like the CIA was a rogue agency going around killing people at will, which of course was utter nonsense. Every one of the presidents involved knew about these activities and approved of them, but they were on paper kept out of the loop so they could exercise what's called plausible deniability. And when something became public, they were able to say, I knew nothing about that. That, of course, was nonsense. They knew everything about it. It started in the Eisenhower administration, looking into the dictators in Africa, went through Cuba with Fidel Castro and the attempts to assassinate him, and then a series of plots elsewhere, which were all sanctioned by the United States government. The CIA wasn't doing anything that it wasn't asked to do. They weren't doing this on their own. The FBI, of course, was involved in illegal spying on domestic political groups. They may have been unsavory, like the American Communist Party or the Socialist Workers' Party, but the activities and the infiltration were deemed illegal by the committee. As a result of that, some of us left the committee and went to work in the Justice Department to draft guidelines so that the FBI could conduct surveillance of domestic organizations within constitutional constraints. The Church Committee did a good job. It issued some very important reports. One that I was deeply involved in was the assassination attempts of foreign leaders. That was a separate and big report. The FBI domestic surveillance program was another very, very big report. The conduct of covert operations overseas by the CIA, particularly in the area of Chile. They spent a great deal of time in the case of Chile with Salvador Allende and the people involved in the attempted overthrow of the Chilean government. I think one thing you can say about the Church Committee was it was ahead of its time. The difference was the Democrats were running the show and everything they did was just fine. When the Republicans started looking into things, that was just awful because the intelligence agencies and the FBI could do no wrong, according to the Democrats. The Democrats who for years had assaulted the FBI and the CIA automatically almost ridiculously became their defenders, no matter how outrageous the behavior of the agency or the Bureau was. They were aided in that effort by James Comey, who will go down in history as the most corrupt FBI director in history. And I hope that in the near future, a grand jury will be impaneled somewhere in the United States to investigate him, Jack Smith, John Brennan, and a number of other people who conspired to deny Donald Trump his civil rights beginning in 2016 up until today. I believe that there has been a continuing effort to deny Donald Trump his civil rights, to undermine his ability as president, to assault him politically, even physically, and to corrupt the environment around President Trump. So I'm very, very hopeful that Pam Bondi and the very fine people running the Justice Department now will get started with their weaponization group, which has been established by memorandum, and start to investigate properly through the use of federal grand juries all of the people who tried to discredit Donald Trump by denying him his civil rights. And that includes the 51 former intelligence officers who signed the famous letter claiming that the Hunter laptop was Russian disinformation, which of course it wasn't. And they knew it at the time when they signed that letter. And the FBI knew it at the time, but didn't say anything about it publicly. Also, let me just say one thing about Christopher Wray, who was the successor to James Comey at the FBI. Christopher Wray was what we call in the study of communist Russia, an apparatchik. He was a guy always worried about his next job. He purposely tried to remain invisible. He gave testimony on Capitol Hill that was less than vanilla. In my opinion, he dissembled repeatedly in front of the Congress, especially about January 6th and the use of undercover operatives and informants. I think Christopher Wray should be the subject of an investigation, not an internal investigation at the Justice Department, but of a part of a separate grand jury as to the manner in which he abused power. And I include in that the raid at Mar-a-Lago, which I believe was the single greatest abuse of power by any law enforcement official in history. And that includes Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, and all the people in the public integrity section at the time. And of course, Christopher Wray, the FBI director, and the team of FBI agents from Washington, D.C. that they sent down to Florida. For some reason, they used agents from D.C. rather than Florida to raid Mar-a-Lago. That is a blot on American history that the American media likes to ignore because they don't like talking about the fact, the pictures of FBI agents swarming through the residence in Mar-a-Lago, going through Melania Trump's underwear drawer and the room of the son, Barron, at Mar-a-Lago. I think that is one of the most disgusting abuses of law enforcement power in the history of the country. It has not been properly accounted for. And I think a grand jury in the Southern District of Florida is required to go into all of that. And that would, of course, include all of the conduct of Jack Smith, the special counsel.
Joe, well, that's it for today, guys. That pretty much summarizes the entire last 25 to 30 years in American history. Joe, wow, power-packed opening statement. A couple things there. I had dinner last night with a former senator or former congressman, and we talked about we talked about communism in America, and you mentioned the American Communist Group early on. I think people forget that communism has been in America since the 1910s, even before the Bolshevik Revolution. This movement has been infiltrating American society in every possible way and only gaining strength over time. Going into the church committee, and again, this is overwhelmingly, for if you haven't figured this out, if you're not following politics for the last 40 years, there was a gigantic flip in support of intelligence agencies by the Democratic Party. I don't really believe in the two-party system. I think George Washington was probably right in the beginning, but it's very obvious at this point in time that Democrats have been in support of complete tyrannical government control, which is a communist construct, and supporting these agencies breaking the law. I think one thing you brought up, Joe, that a lot of people are going to be shocked at is that all of these presidents knew of these assassination attempts, which of course they did. They're the commander in chief of the country. And how do they create this plausible deniability on the mishaps of intelligence agencies from a legal perspective?
Well, the agency and the director, Alan Dulles, started this. He was, of course, the father of U.S. intelligence after World War II. Alan Dulles created the concept of plausible deniability. They knew from World War II that the leaders of countries needed to be able to say that they didn't know about things in order to preserve their public image as not being involved in what we call dirty tricks. The person who fumbled the ball most on this was James Comey when he destroyed the relationship between the FBI and the Justice Department when he was a dirty cop. I coined the phrase dirty cop in describing James Comey when I heard he was dropping the charges against Hillary Clinton on that fabled day in July of 2016. The bottom line is the intelligence agencies themselves, in a different period in American history, post-World War II, 1948, the establishment of the CIA after the Office of Strategic Services from World War II, everything, they decided that it was possible to keep a secret. You could have intelligence activities. You could do things that were not very pretty, but you could get away with it. And then if they became public, the president could deny knowledge. And that was designed to insulate him from responsibility so he could have continuing conversations with world leaders, including continuing conversations with countries where we had conducted covert operations. So it's all part of a process. It's evolved over the years. Here's the thing about the Democratic Party that's so fascinating. In the post-World War II era, the Democratic Party had some fabulous people in power. Stuart Symington, J. William Fulbright. I mean, all sorts of fantastic moderate to conservative Democrats who were virulently anti-communist, hated communism, not like the Democrats of today. The Democrats of today are, some of them are clearly communist. Some of them are socialist. Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. The issue, however, is the bigger party is definitely on the far, far, far left, leaning toward communism. And some of them are, if not avowed communists, they spout that line. And so the question is, why is there such a change? And the answer is the Democratic Party has just taken a turn for the worse. And all of the people who are reasonable and used to bring the party to heel when it was doing stupid things are gone. They're either dead or they're dying or they've lost their voice. And you can see it in the Senate. You can certainly see it in the House of Representatives, where the party, the crazies on the left in the House and the Democratic Party are amazing. So that old party doesn't exist anymore. But I do think it's important to remember that the Democrats of old were pretty conservative. I'll give you a good example. During the Church Committee, we were investigating how the labor unions were being infiltrated by communists. In the course of doing that, we came across some of the most fabulous information about George Meany, who was at the time the head of the AFL-CIO. He was a bulwark of American labor. He was a tough cookie. He was pro-union. He was really, really fought for the men and women of organized labor. But here's the secret about George Meany. He was violently anti-communist, and he spied for the United States government. Every time he went overseas to international conferences or countries, he would immediately return to the United States, go to the CIA at Langley, give them a full debriefing. His relationship with the CIA was kept secret for 50 years until the Church Committee. The Democrats weren't even aware that George Meany had done that. When they started to investigate the unions and they found this out and they got these memos, they tried to shut it down. They didn't want the American people to know that George Meany was, in fact, a card-carrying Democrat who was a virulent anti-communist, a great labor leader, and he spied for the United States government. It's one of the greatest stories of the Church Committee. It's what we call the unintended consequence theory of investigations.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, it has been such a big change. We talked about this last night as well. You know, JFK would be considered a conservative today, and he was
cookie.
Yeah, and he was considered a left winger.
He served in the military, PT 109. Kennedy knew what it was to put your life on the line.
Absolutely, and he did. Right? I mean, he proof in the pudding. Let's get into James Comey. I think this is one of the most dark characters in modern U.S. history. I think very few people know about James Comey. I have a visceral reaction to James Comey. There was I'm here in Dallas, and there's a part of town where a bunch of shops. And when I first moved here, I saw a guy sitting on a park bench that looked exactly like James Comey, and my fist balled up. It was just a visceral reaction, and I was like, "Whoa, this isn't James Comey." Give us a rundown of the history of James Comey, who's coming back into the spotlight through his daughter, who is now involved in multiple cases. Let's get into James Comey. What is the background on him? Tell us about his career. You mentioned his name, and I think more people need to know the history of James Comey.
Well, he was an assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York when Rudy Giuliani was the U.S. attorney there. He tried a lot of cases. He tried the famous Gambino case, the organized crime case, one of the big ones. And he did a very good job. He developed a great reputation. And later on, he went into the Justice Department and was made Deputy Attorney General. He was widely respected in the department. You have to realize Jim Comey's about 6'8" or 6'9". He's a very imposing figure. It's fascinating because when he did become FBI director, he surrounded himself with people who were all 5'4" and 5'5". When you go back and you look at Peter Strzok, McCabe, all those people, Baker, they're all shorties. It's really fascinating the kind of people Comey surrounded himself because he wanted to be a towering figure, and he purposely surrounded himself with little people. So it's quite a comment about his own self-image. He was the FBI director, and things started out well, and then they grossly deteriorated into his tenure. I'll never forget our meeting with President Trump right after the election in November of 2016. We had a meeting with people, and my wife, Victoria Tunsing, and I recommended that they fire Comey immediately after the election because it was quite obvious what he was doing. They didn't listen to us. There were people around Trump who said it'll look bad, quote unquote, it'll look bad. Well, how did it look a few months later when he framed General Flynn? He conspired with Brennan and Clapper to frame Donald Trump. They falsely created the Russian hoax with the Steele dossier in conjunction with Hillary Clinton. James Comey never paid a price for that because, and one of the great disappointments I have of both Mueller and Durham and Horowitz, the IG for the Department of Justice, is that they never properly described the conspiracy against Donald Trump, and they never made James Comey pay a price. Now, I have not read whether or not James Comey still has his security clearances. I don't think he does. And I don't think Chris Wray does, although I've never seen anything in writing about Chris Wray. But the fact is, the Comey mistakes could have been avoided if Trump had fired Comey on Inauguration Day. And he wouldn't do it because there were family members telling him that it wouldn't look good. Those family members were responsible for the destruction of his first term. Now, Trump doesn't like to talk about that because he's a great guy and he doesn't want to diss members of his family. Sure. But the truth is, he was done in by his own people.
And is that a common theme in DC? Don't do the right thing because it'll look bad. I mean, everything's politics in DC. You go to a restaurant and it's political, but is that a common issuance in today's world?
It's very, to me, I just watch what people do. It's really simple. I have the old prosecutor's instinct. For example, when all this stuff about Flynn came up, I knew right away, and so did my wife, Victoria. We knew that they were framing Flynn, that it was underway. You had to be a moron. A first-year prosecutor knew what Comey was doing with McCabe and Strzok and Page and James Baker. We found out later, that really in an amazing, amazing story, that on January 5th, 2017, 15 days before Trump was sworn in as president of the United States, there was a meeting in the Oval Office. In that meeting was President Obama, Vice President Biden, James Comey, John Brennan, James Clapper, Susan Rice, and a couple of other people. And what they were discussing on January 5th was Hillary Clinton's memo about Russian collusion and what should be done about it. And Susan Rice, on Inauguration Day, January 20th, for some reason, she waited 15 days. She wrote a memo for the record, which is now available. You can get it on the internet, where she said they met and discussed this, and that President Obama said he wanted the counterintelligence investigation of President Trump to be conducted by the book. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm a prosecutor and I see that memo, here's what I do. I go to the President of the United States and I say, right now, I'm talking today, not 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. You go to the President today and say, Mr. President, I want you to waive executive privilege for Barack Obama and Joe Biden and all of their employees. We want to put all of them in a federal grand jury. The statute of limitations has not expired, as everybody says, because every time John Brennan, Clapper, Comey went on television and made public statements about Donald Trump, good or bad, those were overt acts in furtherance of a conspiracy. And each time they went on television, they extended the statute of limitations another 5 years. So when James Comey the other day posted his little 8647, the seashells on the beach, that was an overt act in furtherance of a conspiracy against Donald Trump to deny Donald Trump his civil rights. And that extended the statute of limitations on that conspiracy from 2016 for another 5 years to 2031.
Wow. So they continue. So the door is wide open.
It is, as far as I'm concerned, as a legal matter. They can fight it out in court.
Now, do you think that's going to happen? That's the question, right?
I do.
We all know that this is a corrupt system. We've known it. Some of us have known it for 8 to 10 years. You think that's going to happen? You think we're going to go through with putting these guys on a grand jury?
Oh,
I hope so.
And here's the thing: people should draw a distinction. It's a fine one, but it's an important one. You can investigate to a fare thee well. That doesn't mean you're going to come up with enough evidence to bring a criminal charge that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But there will be grand juries around the United States, not in one place, but in many places where, for example, where Fani Willis brought her case against 18 members of the Trump administration. There will be a grand jury in Georgia on that case. There will be grand juries in Florida. There will be grand juries in Colorado. I don't know that. I'm not an insider at the Justice Department, but if I were sitting there reviewing the evidence, there would be grand juries in all of those federal districts plus. Wow.
That's the best news I've heard all day, Joe. And it's just an opinion, right? So you don't know, I don't know, but I think the entire country, I think even people who voted for Biden in 2020, who voted for Trump in 2024, I think even they're waiting for this. I mean, I think the latest poll was 77% of America doesn't believe that the 2020 election was legitimate. These are huge numbers.
I think that there's a very important reason why this needs to happen. These grand juries need to happen because this is the way you return confidence and faith in the way government is being run. When you read the polls about the lack of confidence in the FBI and the DOJ, that is a horrible thing for a society like ours. The FBI needs to be above reproach. And Kash Patel and Dan Bongino are doing a terrific job of bringing it back to where it should be. And people need to give them space. And they need to give Pam Bondi space. And I think that the way they do, the best thing they can do is to not make speeches and, send out letters and criticize people. I mean, I'm doing that right now because I'm doing an interview, and that's my job, is to talk publicly about the issues because I have a responsibility as someone who knows his stuff to talk about it. I think their responsibility is to open up legitimate investigations with grand juries in districts all over the country. For example, there's just no doubt that in some states like Arizona and Colorado, there were actions and lawsuits filed against people in the Trump administration which were designed to destroy them, to ruin their lives, to sap their finances, to file disciplinary proceedings against them with various bars. The 65 Project, which was designed to go after people, 65 Project went after me. They filed a complaint with the DC bar to try and get me disbarred. It was thrown out. But the point is, they did it. They made me expend energy and time. That should all be accounted for. Everybody who runs those things, the Soros organization, which funded all of this stuff, needs to be held accountable. They need to be put in grand juries. There is a way to do this and do it properly. And the way is federal grand juries.
Yeah, you've got, victims out there like Tina Peters. I mean, the list goes on with all of these false accusations, which lead to, and guys, these aren't small. These are federal cases in most instances, or state cases. These cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to defend. And that's the purpose.
I can tell you. Let me give you an example. In 2021, on a Saturday morning, my wife and I were at home, and the doorbell rang. I went to the front door, and it was 5 FBI agents, and they had a search warrant for our house. And what did they want? They wanted my wife's cell phone and her iPad. It was a warrant issued by the Southern District of New York. Lisa Monaco, I can't remember the name. Michael Berman was the U.S. attorney at the time. You recall that Bill Barr had a huge fallout with him and fired him. But that warrant was authorized by a Republican administration, but not under the control of Bill Barr's Justice Department. They came, they got my wife's phone. The FBI agents were actually quite fascinating. The lead agent, when I opened the front door, told me who he was, gave me his card, and he said, "Look, I don't want to be here. We don't want to be here. We're doing this because we have to do it, but we're not going to search your house. All we want is Victoria's phone and her iPad." I said, "Come on in." So we all stood around the dining room table, and she gave him her phone. They went through the phone. They said, "We're going to have to keep this for 24 hours. We said, "Well, we don't have any choice. You got a search warrant." The iPad that she had, she turned it over to him. They went through it. They said, "This is not the iPad named in the warrant." And we said, "So?" And he said, "Where's the other one?" I said, "Well, let me tell you where it is. I took the lead from Hillary Clinton. And when Victoria's old iPad died and she replaced it with, I took a hammer and I smashed the iPads to bits and I threw it away. That was months ago, and it doesn't exist and it's nowhere to be found." They said, "Okay, thank you." They left. They took her phone. They sent it back. Now, what happened? Why did that happen? There was what Victoria and Rudy Giuliani had been doing was, Rudy was in Europe trying to help President Trump. He was a lawyer for President Trump, and he had gone to Ukraine because he had been given information that people in that embassy in Ukraine were hurting President Trump, and that they were acting under the orders of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, who were working, ones that were funded by George Soros, who were working with people inside the State Department, mainly Victoria Nuland, who was the head honcho, head hit woman for George Soros in the State Department. And so Rudy asked Victoria if she would represent the local prosecutor in Ukraine who had evidence that Joe Biden and Burisma was corrupt. Well, of course, we all know now that that's exactly true. Everything was corrupt about the relationship between Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Burisma, all the money that they made over there. So what they did was, the Southern District of New York, in order to prevent Rudy and Victoria from getting information about Joe Biden, they cut him off. They wouldn't allow them into the country, into Ukraine. They said they wouldn't be able to protect them. And then years later, a couple of years later, they issued these warrants to get the information for one reason and one reason only. They knew that there had been no crime committed. They weren't representing any in violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. In fact, when my wife was asked to represent people in the Ukraine, she sent them letters and emails that said, it may be necessary to register under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And they still went and got warrants for her and for Rudy. That is another example of weaponization that needs to be investigated by the Justice Department. And that was Lisa Monaco, who was the former Deputy Attorney General who just left office, Michael Berman, who was the U.S. Attorney in New York, and others. And it's just a matter of time before all of that gets taken care of. So this weaponization thing is serious. It was vicious. It was widespread. They tried to destroy people's lives. And for us, by the way, once they executed that search warrant, when they take my wife's phone, they take attorney-client privilege information. So we had to protect the information about clients that was on that phone and in the clouds. $500,000 to hire attorneys to represent us in the Southern District of New York to defend the attorney-client information on that phone and in the cloud. Let me tell you something. I don't want to hear anything from Merrick Garland about the rule of law. They're the most despicable, lawless people, he and Lisa Monaco, who ever worked in the Justice Department.
$500,000 to defend a law that is clear-cut, black and white, client privilege. This is literally the simplest law in the world, and you had to spend. So this is the purpose of lawfare. We've heard that term for about 3 years. I don't think most people ever heard that. I'm a businessman, so I'm very familiar with lawfare. It's a very common tactic. But in politics, I don't think people have put these two and two together. This has been going on for about 80 years in this country, really accelerated in the last 15, and hyperdrive for the last 5. Now, let's get into another interesting topic, Joe, that I know you can bring some serious clarity to. You brought up NGOs, you brought up George Soros. About 4 or 5 years ago, if you brought up the name George Soros on any news network, you were banned from a news network. And
yes, I know, we were.
yeah, you definitely were one of the first people kicked out the door. Now you can say his name. I always say that George Soros, the character, if you've ever seen Usual Suspects, yes. The Kaiser Sose character is George Soros, right? Yep. The name you can't name. Give us a brief history of George Soros, because you have more understanding of this guy. This guy is evil. This guy takes down currencies and nations for a living. He has a chip on his shoulder. His goal in his book was to, before I die, I wish to end Western culture and the United States. This is literally what he puts in his books. And now he's funding judges. He's funding NGOs. We have so many Soros-funded prosecutors and defenders and judges. How do we unwind this? Give us a brief rundown of George Soros from your detailed point of view. And then how do we get him out of all this stuff? How do we do that?
You've actually summarized it beautifully. I couldn't do it any better. The bottom line is he's an evil man. He took his residency in the United States and his citizenship, and he sought to destroy it from within. I mean, he is the enemy within. One of the interesting stories about George Soros for me was we were very much aware of what Soros-funded NGOs and Victoria Nuland were doing in Ukraine to protect Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. We used to go on the Lou Dobbs show regularly, my wife and I, and discuss all the stuff that was going on. And one night, Lou was prompted to ask me about George Soros and his relation to the State Department. And I went on and I said that he wielded great influence in the State Department, an unnatural influence in the State Department. The next day, a guy named the guy who runs the Anti-Defamation League, this guy, I think his name is Rosenblatt.
Yes.
He sent a letter to Suzanne Scott, the president of Fox News at the time. She was the successor to Roger Ailes. She was the head of makeup, and they made her the president of Fox News. He sent a letter claiming that I was an anti-Semite because of the way that I had used the word influence or control with the State Department with Soros. So she took steps to have me banned, Victoria banned. Eventually, Lou Dobbs got fired as a result of it because we had done other things on his show, which is criticize some other people on the Fox network who were saying dumb and stupid things. Now, fast forward a few years. About 2 years ago, that was less than that, Newt Gingrich is on from Rome, where his wife was the ambassador to the Holy See. And so, Callista. And so Newt starts talking about George Soros and his outrageous influence on American politics and the U.S. government. Whatever her name is, I can't remember her name, goes ballistic and said, we can't talk about that. You're not allowed to do that. Now, this is Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House. She's going absolutely crazy. Harris Faulkner. He's going nuts, saying you can't talk about that. So Newt says, well, I don't know why. I've talked about him for years. Everybody knows what he does. She said, well, we can't. So they took an immediate break. So they come back and they go to another subject. So my wife calls Newt in Rome. She had represented Newt's wife in some matters when Newt was Speaker. And she told Newt about how this had all happened. And he said, I've never heard of anything so stupid. After that appearance by Newt Gingrich, the ban on talking about Soros was over. You could talk about Soros, whatever. So what was it about Newt and Soros and Suzanne Scott at Fox, who still currently leads the thing? You know, she gets all these kudos by giving milk to children every year at all these various,
that's right,
all these fundraisers for various diseases and things. And she's become a god at Fox because she protects people. she's one of the worst people ever in the news business. She knows nothing about news. And can you imagine caving to George Soros? That'll tell you how strong she is.
Yeah. Well, Fox News by itself is, first of all mainstream media is a joke at this point in time. Fox News
is really pathetic.
Fox is one of the more one-sided networks out there. And I'm going to go back to this point, Joe, because this is hilarious. So you brought up George Soros's name on television. You were accused of being an anti-Semite for saying that he had oversized influence in Washington, D.C., which I really want to know how he got there besides just paying people, because there's definitely a story behind it. But the interesting thing is that George Soros himself admits in a story that I don't believe that he actually worked with Nazi soldiers to steal from Jews when he was growing up in Hungary, which would kind of make him the worst of the worst. Just one of those points to bring up of how hypocritical these statements are from people.
I can tell you, that's what we used to call a capo. People who cooperated with the Nazis like that and who were Jewish were called capos. And I know that because I'm part Jewish. All of my relatives in Rome are Jews. They were, and all of us here in the United States are Catholic. We still have Jewish blood. But the interesting thing about that was that it was so hilarious when I was accused of being an anti-Semite. I was laughing and I was screaming at the same time. But the thing about Soros is the insidiousness of the way he has sort of weaseled his way into the entire sinew of the American body politic by money. It's not through intellect or smarts or anything. It's pure, utter money power. He buys what he wants. He gets what he wants. For example, Larry Krasner, the district attorney in Philadelphia, just got reelected for his third term. One of the worst prosecutors in the United States. The city is a wreck. The crime rate is astronomical, all because his crazy Soros-funded philosophies. But the truth is, Soros has been protected by the mainstream media because they love him. He's part of their game. But I'm afraid his influence is waning, and his son, who's now taken over the Open Society Foundation, is not up to the task. He's a kind of a strange little fellow. And it'll be interesting to see how he manipulates the money process henceforth.
Well, now he's with Huma Abedin, so there's another interesting relationship that's tied together. These people are all tied together. It's really brutal and corrupt. Just how incestuous these relationships are throughout power. It is. So Soros constructs this web of NGOs, and if you guys aren't familiar with NGOs, you really need to do some research on this. This is a tax haven for the wealthy. That basically has more authority than a private corporation, less authority than the government in theory, but a lot of them have governmental influence. And they're responsible for just about everything that's happening on the border right now. These are all NGOs conducting all of the transportation from Africa, from Middle East, from Europe into the United States. NGOs are a topic that are talked about as little as U.S. monopolies. I mean, these are two topics that need to be talked about and broken up throughout the country this entire time. But now you have Alex Soros running these, which is kind of the evil little midget, son of George Soros, combined with Huma Abedin, who's very close with Hillary Clinton and the Muslim Brotherhood. How do we untangle this web, Joe? Like, this has to be done in a legal perspective. We can't go any other route than that. But how does America get out of the clutches of these god awful people?
Well, one of the things that can be done is you have a great Secretary of State in Marco Rubio, and he's digging into all of this stuff. And what they have to do is they simply have to cut off the NGOs. For example, Catholic Charities, that's an NGO, non-governmental organization. They are responsible for some of the worst offenses on the border. They are responsible for child trafficking as a result of the way they fund these other organizations that bring immigrants across the border. I think it's absolutely disgraceful what Catholic Charities has done. But, they deny that they know this, that, and the other thing. But their money has been part of the process which has allowed the border to be destroyed, the women to be raped, children to be trafficked in sex trafficking. It's really, so the answer is Rubio's looking at all these things. And one of the things is you don't have this powerful figure, Victoria Nuland, who was able to direct and actually run the Department of State and use NGOs to do her bidding. That to me requires a separate investigation because I question completely the nature of the relationships that allowed her to do that. And I think looking into Open Society and all the other organizations that Soros set up in Ukraine is really essential. to getting to the bottom of this. But those organizations right now they're in Ukraine. Some of it's still conducting absolutely outrageous influence on the government there.
Yeah, I mean, you can look through. I mean, Soros has way more than the Open Society. There's Mambala that needs to be looked into, which is an awful name. Research Mambala if you'd like. But the Soros Organization, Victoria Nuland, all these people, we know this, right? So I'm going to ask a question from the American people, and you may not know the answer, but I'm going to get your opinion on this. Marco Rubio's been in office since the Tea Party, okay? When the Tea Party was a thing, that's what brought Rubio to office. I love what he's doing since he's been in office. I think myself and about half of conservatives were concerned about Rubio as a pick, but he's done an incredible job since he's been in office. He has absolutely done an incredible job. And you say he's digging into these things. How do you not know this stuff? How is there not, an investigation prepared the moment he walks into office? Is this just bureaucratic process, or this is a huge web to untangle?
Well,
but
because they don't have any troops. Remember, one of the first things the Trump people did was impose a hiring freeze. Okay, yeah. Fine, you can have a hiring freeze, but you need to have exceptions. They need to be able to get people in. They can't get people confirmed. The Office of White House Personnel is not processing people out fast enough. The background checks are ridiculous. They can't get people in office. They don't have enough people. They don't have enough U.S. attorneys. They want to go after all these people for weaponization. They don't have U.S. attorneys in place in almost all the districts in the country. That's the problem with the Senate, the White House Personnel Office, you name it. They just don't have the troops.
And that's self-imposed. The hiring freeze is self-imposed. I think there's a purpose there. Obviously, I don't know what that is.
They can brag about it all they want. I think it's great. But the bottom line is this: you want to fight a war, you better have some soldiers.
Great point, Joe. So we need to start staffing up, which is probably going to take a while to fight, as you've just described in 41 minutes. It's hard to find the right people who do the right thing. So I'm with you on Bondi, on Cash, on Bongino. Guys, they've been in office less than 100 days. Yes, too many TV appearances, too many speaking engagements, too many pre-announcements of pre-announcements. I get it. However, this is a big chore, guys. Our country is completely corrupted, and this is our shot. This is it. We have 4 years to solve these problems, in my opinion. Hopefully that'll continue. But Joe, this is a web. I keep using that word, but I don't think people really understand how interwoven it is. So it's a great point. I never thought about that. They don't have the staff to actually do the prosecutions right now. So that's the next phase to look for is, who are these attorneys that we're going to hire? And as citizens, we have the obligation to look into them. And then, of course, voting in the midterms is going to be a big thing. I think people forget midterms are coming up in next year. And that's another big process. We've got to have control of the House and the Senate at that point in time to make any of this work. Would you agree? If we lose that power midterms, this is all for naught.
Oh, well, I can tell you the first thing will happen if we lose the House, they'll start impeachment proceedings against Trump just to take up his time. Of course, I would ignore it if I were he. I'd just go about my business. But the bottom line is this: we have to keep the House. We have to increase in the House. We have to increase in the Senate. This is a big deal. Michael Whatley, who's in charge of the RNC, has done a fabulous job under very difficult circumstances. They are running advertisements now. They're doing stuff. They're trying to get candidates. They're doing a very, very good job. I mean, we were harmed terribly by Ronna McDaniel. She was a miserable RNC chairman. She did a lot of damage to the party. She cared about limousines, airplanes, hairstyles, makeup, all that stuff. I mean, just really disgusting abuse of the resources of the Republican National Committee. And Trump should have gotten rid of her immediately. But again, it's what he always does. He kept somebody too long. He got Whatley in there just in time with about a year left before the 2024 election to get him elected and to get people into the RNC. Now they're making money hand over fist. They fired a lot of just hangers on at the RNC, people who didn't do anything. I remember we had a meeting once with somebody there and we said, we've got to win these races. And the guy said, this is a lawyer for the RNC said, what do you mean? We make more money when we're out of office than when we're in. Can you believe the mentality of somebody like that at the RNC?
I can't believe the mentality of somebody like that at an ice cream store, to be quite frank with you. Yeah, we have a fail up society. I mean, that seems to be in positions of power. People fail up. You do a horrible job, you get promoted, you make more money. You do another horrible job, you get another promotion and more money. Well,
our guys have plenty of time to get the job done, especially if they keep the House and the Senate. I think I think we're in good shape in the Senate, but we got to work hard. The House is bothersome, but I think we can still keep the House. I hope we can increase it to a reasonable number. But I think, again, Whatley's doing a fabulous job. If anybody can make sure we have a fighting chance, it's Michael Whatley.
And then who do we look to in the judicial system to clean out some of these? Like how do we remove these judges with unconstitutional hearings? You can't. There's nothing that can be done.
You can't do anything about it. What you have to do is you have to change jurisdiction. You can. One of the things you can do, but it'll never happen because of the Senate, is you can actually close federal courts. You can just de-establish federal courts or certain judgeships. You can just get rid of them. But there's no stomach for that. There isn't the time to do that. You just have to let it work its way through the courts and do the best you can. And, we have a sometimes yes, sometimes no Supreme Court. You can't do anything about it. Look the other day with the case of the charter school. Amy Coney Barrett was not there because she sends her kids to charter schools 4-4, and it upholds the lower court ruling, and the charter schools are out in Oklahoma. So, this is a tough way to go. When you have a constitutional republic, these things are going to happen. What that means is you got to win elections, you got to elect people who know what they're doing, and you got to stop confirming federal. For example, all the Biden judges got through with practically no opposition from Republicans in the Senate Judiciary Committee or on the floor of the Senate. Absolutely outrageous for Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Of course, you look at a guy like Tom Tillis, who didn't like Ed Martin and didn't want him to be U.S. attorney in D.C. A guy like Tom Tillis, did he show up? Did he vote? Did he object? Did he cross-examine these crazy judges that Biden put on the bench? You have never seen a crazier bunch of U.S. District Court judges than the ones that Joe Biden put on the bench. They are nuts.
And how long do we have left of these people? What are their terms?
Life.
Great. Wow. Yeah, we have to. I think one thing that we talk about a lot on here, Joe, is just how apathetic the American public has been in understanding these things. So thank you for sharing this with us.
Sure, my pleasure.
We need to get more active in understanding our own local politics. A lot of these things come down to understanding the judge in your county. We're focusing on U.S. presidential elections, but our local elections mean a hell of a lot more than we actually realize. School board meeting. We had a huge school board election here.
Especially school boards.
Yeah. Our little town here, we had, last elections was like a 10 or 12 vote lead for the wrong people. The right people won by 50 this time. So these things are really important, guys. Get out there and get in your communities. Get offline. We spend too much time dealing with federal stuff online and imaginary dreams. Get in your local communities and get on board with understanding who your judges are, your commissioners, your comptrollers, your treasurers, your school board members. This stuff is so important. Joe, I know you're short on time here today. Any closing thoughts for everybody to kind of get out there and motivate them to? This country is amazing, by the way. America is the most amazing experiment in the history of mankind, and people have been trying to take it away from us slowly for 80 years at least. But Americans are fighting back. We're incredible people. We're extremely resilient. We're going to win this in the end, in the long term. And I love your optimism for where we are with getting some justice for this horrible last at least 12 years. Let's call it since Obama, like really, really bad corruption. But Joe, final thoughts on where people can find you.
Well, I say amen to you for what your closing was pretty good by my standards. People just need to vote, see something, say something, support the right people, get out and vote. Give some contributions to great candidates. Doesn't have to be a lot of money. Every dollar counts. But you just got to get out there and you got to support people. President Trump is doing a miraculous job under the most difficult of circumstances with the media against him, and he's still winning every day. So pray for the guy, pray for the country, and get out there and vote. You got to vote. You got to get people to vote for the midterms. It's really important. Absolutely. And where can everyone find you, Joe? I don't do social media. I do television and these things, and that's it. I don't post anything. I don't have a podcast. It's just not in my nature. So you're still happy. That's good. Good. I'm very happy. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining us here. God bless you. God bless this country. And we'll see you next time here on the Rice Report.